Week 11 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few quarterbacks I would drop this week. The first guy, Matt Ryan of the Atlanta Falcons. So Matt Ryan, I thought he was going to have a big game at the Dallas Cowboys, but obviously it went total opposite in that one in Week 10. 117 passing yards and 2 interceptions in that game. So Matt Ryan, he was on a good tear the last 2 out of 3 weeks before here. Week 8 versus Carolina, 146 passing yards, a touchdown, 2 windows, and 3 rushing yards. In Week 9 at the New Orleans Saints, he had a big game, 343 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, 8 rushing yards, and a touchdown. And then versus Dallas, he fell flat on his face in that ball game. So right here, he's got a Thursday night matchup versus a very tough New England Patriot defense that we saw just blow out the Browns. And the Patriots give up the third least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. And right here, without Julio Jones this season, Ryan's been hit or miss for the most part. And he's only a matchup-based quarterback. But going into that game, like I mentioned, at the Dallas Cowboys, they gave up the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. But right here, he couldn't get the job done. And now a quick turnaround versus a tough New England defense. I don't see him doing much this week. And right now, I would drop Matt Ryan. There's better options and more consistent options this week at the quarterback position. The next quarterback I would drop this week is Trevor Lawrence of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Trevor Lawrence, it's just been a struggle for him for the most part here in his rookie season here. He saw a couple good games in weeks 5 and 6, but ever since then, week 8 at Seattle, 238 passing yards, a touchdown, and into 11 rushing yards. Week 9 versus the Buffalo Bills, 118 passing yards and 4 rushing yards. And week 10 at the Colts, only 162 passing yards and 33 rushing yards with a 2-point conversion and a fumble loss. So right now, that's not getting the job done. And going into that week 10 ball game at the Indianapolis Colts, the Colts gave up the 2nd most fantasy points to quarterbacks, but Jacksonville and Lawrence couldn't get anything done in that ball game. And right here, it's another good matchup on paper versus the 49ers that give up the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks. But this week, I just don't see Lawrence getting the job done, and he can't be a guy I could trust here, so he's definitely a quarterback I would drop this week. And the third and final quarterback I would drop this week, Teddy Bridgewater of the Denver Broncos. So Bridgewater, after a nice game at the Dallas Cowboys in Week 9 and Week 10, he didn't do much of anything versus a mediocre Philadelphia Eagle defense. 226 passing yards, and that's it. No touchdown, no rushing yards, no nothing for Bridgewater in that ball game. So right here, the last few games for Bridgewater been mediocre at best. Week 8 versus Washington, 213 passing yards, a touchdown. Week 9 at Dallas, I thought he was going to get it going. 249, a touchdown, a rushing touchdown, and a 2-point conversion. And then he fell flat versus Philly. And now week 11, Denver goes on by. And there's no reason to stash Bridgewater, in my opinion. He's a mediocre quarterback. He's inconsistent. And with the bye week, he makes an easy play to drop this week. So that's a few quarterbacks I would drop here for week 11 of the fantasy football season.